Hey everyone, and welcome back to Daily Tuition. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can make this beautiful leaderboard section for your website. You can notice here, inside this leaderboard, I have a few users with their score. I'm going to show out all these users using their score and the date. For example, let's suppose I want to get previous 7 days leader. I can just simply click on this 7 days button. When I click on it, you can see I'm going to get the previous 7 days leader. Or if I want to get the previous 30 days leader, I can click on this 30 days button. When I click on it, I'm going to get the previous 30 days leader. And if I want to get all-time user, I can just click on this all-time button. You can see I'm going to have all data of all the users. So let's take a look at how we can create this beautiful leaderboard section using React application. So as you can see on the right side here in the VS Code, I already have here a folder leaderboard, which is my React application. I already have my React application with the command npx create react app and then specify the app name. I choose name for this application leaderboard. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this app. Once I have my application, let me just start this. So I'm going to say here npm start. I'm going to first enter into my project directory. You can notice I already have in my project directory. So once in my project directory, I'm going to start the application with npm start command. So I'm going to say npm start and press enter. So this will start the development server. And as you can see, I'm going to have my React application. What I have to do is I have to create a new component inside this source. Now because this is going to print the default component, let me just get rid of this header, save this file. When I save the changes, you can see I'm going to have the live reload feature to this application. Now just out of that, I'm going to create a new component folder inside this source. Here I'm going to create a new folder, components, something like this. And inside this, I'm going to create a new file, board.js. This is my React functional component, right? So let's create here a simple snippet, React functional component. So this will create a simple React component, something like this. Make sure you specify the capital letter to the component name. Now let me save this back to the app.js, and inside this div here, let me first import this component. So I'm going to say here import board from the components board file, something like this. Let me get rid of this app.css and this logo file because we are not using it. Just out of that, let me just add here my board component, board, something like this, and save the changes. So whenever I save the changes, you can see I'm going to have here a simple board text. Let me add here a style.css inside this component to style all my components. So I'm going to create a new file here, style.css. Now instead of wasting your all the time by creating a CSS styling for this application, I'm going to just copy and paste some code inside this style.css. Now don't worry, this is just a basic styling of CSS. I just import the font family, specify that font family to all the components, then create two variables with two different colors, then specify some styling, and then I'm going to specify some styling to the component. Now let me save this file back to the app.js, and here I'm going to import this style.css so I can use all the styling in my component. So I'm going to say here import. In the single code, make sure you specify /components and style.css, something like this. When I save the changes, you can see I'm going to have the Poppins font to my text. Just for that, create a new component inside this folder. So I'm going to create a new component here with the name profiles.js, something like this. And just after that, I'm going to back to my board. And instead of this div, I'm going to add here a division tag with the class board. And inside this, I'm going to add h1 heading tag with the title leaderboard, something like this. Now, as you know, I already have styling to these components in the style.css. So that is why when I save the changes, I'm going to have this h1 heading tag at the center of the document. Now to this h1, I'm going to specify class leaderboard. Just out that, after this h1, here I'm going to create division tag with the class duration. And inside this, I have 3 buttons. So I'm going to create here a button with the text 7 days. I'm going to duplicate this button, something like this. And the second button is for 30 days. And the third button is for all time. So you can see I'm going to have here 3 buttons. Just out of that, let me specify data ID to it. So I'm going to say here data ID 7, data ID 30, and data ID 0. Now for all time, I'm going to specify data ID 0. So when I click on this button, I'm going to get this 0 and consider this button as all time button. So this will just return all the data from my database. Now just for that, let me save the changes. And I'm going to create on click event on all these 3 buttons. Now because when I click on the 7 days, I want to filter all the data. So let me create here an handler function. So inside this board, right up here, I'm going to create a constant handle click function. This is what we call the handler function for this on click event. So just for now, I'm going to say console.log and I'm going to say e.target. And I'm going to pass here e parameter, the event parameter, to this handler click. And I'm going to specify here on click. Here I'm going to pass handle click function, something like this. So when I click on this button, I'm going to print the current button. So let me show you. Let me save the changes. Let me open my console. When I click on this button, you can see I'm going to have the current button as a response. So I'm going to have the current button in the console. Let me do the same for all these 3 buttons. So let me copy and paste the same data here. When I click on these buttons, I'm going to have the same result. You can see. Now, just out of that, as you can see in the finished website, these are my profiles. So I'm going to add this profile component right here. In my components folder, right down here, we have the profiles.js. So let me add something inside this component. I'm going to say React functional component. So this will create profiles component. Let me save this. Back to the board. Let me close this style.css because we are not using it. At the top, I'm going to first import profiles from profiles.js. And just on here, I'm going to say profiles, press tab. When I save the changes, you can see I'm going to have my profiles component here. Just out of that, let me back to my profiles component. And here, let me get rid of this division tag. And here I'm going to create a div with the ID profile. And inside this, I'm going to add my profiles. So I'm going to add all these profiles inside this division tag. So to add this data, I'm going to create a new component, or you can say a new function. So I'm going to say here function item, and then we pass here parenthesis. Then I'm going to return HTML inside the parenthesis, something like this. So here I'm going to create a div with the class flex, and then inside this flex, here I'm going to create a div again with the class item. Here I'm going to say img. I'm going to specify the image here inside this source attribute. Just for now, I'm going to copy and paste the image URL here, something like this. Don't worry, we're going to get all this data from the database. This is just for testing. So here I have the image. So once I have the image, I'm going to create here info, the division tag, and inside this, I'm going to create h3 heading tag with the class name, and text dot, something like this. And then I'm going to specify here title, which is name. Now save the changes. You can see I'm not going to get anything here because inside this div, I don't have anything. So let's add here a parenthesis and then call here a function item. Save this. So you can see I have my first profile. Now just out of that, just out of this h3, here I'm going to add a span tag with the text location. Just out of this item div right down here, I'm going to create another item, and then add a spawn tag again for the score. So I'm just going to add here a text score. So this will print the score at the right side of the screen. That's it. Now what I have to do is I have to replace this hard-coded data with the backend data, and I have to iterate this division tag with the array. For this example, I'm going to create a new file, database.js, inside this component. Right here, I'm going to create a file, database.js, and put here a data of backend. Instead of creating a backend for this simple application, I'm going to put the backend data inside this database.js file. Don't worry, you can download this complete project from the link provided in the description. So once you get your backend data, something like this, as a type of array of object, you can just iterate over this array of object and print all this data. Inside this object, we have the name, location, score, the image URL, and the date. So what I have to do is I have to iterate over this array. So in the profile, I'm going to iterate over this array. So to iterate over this array, we need to return empty bracket, and inside that I have to add here a parenthesis to add JavaScript. I'm going to get the data first. So let me pass here a parameter, data. I'm going to get that data and iterate over it using map function. So I'm going to say here map, pass here two parameters, value and index. And just for that, I'm going to grab this division tag and put that inside this map callback function like this. Now when I call this item, I'm going to pass this database as a parameter here. But before that, we need to replace these hard-coded values. So to do that, I'm going to first get rid of this source attribute right from here. And instead of this double quote, I'm going to pass parentheses here. And instead of double quote, I'm going to pass curly braces and say here value.img. I'm going to grab this object and access this img property of it. Now because we iterate over this array, the map function is going to return the object inside this value variable, and I'm going to get the properties from that value object. Just for that, I'm going to get rid of this name, pass here curly braces, then specify value dot name. So I'm going to pass this name property. Get rid of this location. Here I'm going to pass value dot location. At the end, instead of the score, I'm going to pass here value dot score. So I'm going to pass all these properties to this profile. Let me save this. Now because we don't have this data to this item, I'm going to get this error message in the console. So what I'm going to do is when I call this profile inside this board, I'm going to pass this database constant variable to this profile. Here I'm going to say import leaderboard from database. So once I have this data inside this board, I'm going to simply create here a property called leaderboard is equal to, and in the curly braces, I'm going to pass that leaderboard variable. So now I can access this database inside this profile using parentheses. So right here, I'm going to pass an object and call here leaderboard. So this is going to return this leaderboard data inside this variable. And now I can specify this variable right here to the item function. Now just for that, when I save the changes, you can see I'm not going to get anything here because I did not return anything from the map function. So instead of this curly braces, here I'm going to pass parentheses, something like this. So when I pass here parentheses, this is going to return this division tag. Let me save the changes. And now you can see I'm going to have my data here. Now what I want to specify key to each element. So here I'm going to pass key in the curly braces. I'm going to say index. Save this file. I'm not going to get any console error message, and then I'm going to have here my data. As simple as that. Now just for that, I'm going to back to my app.js, and right here I'm going to pass ID to this application to add some styling to the app. So I'm going to add here main ID to this division tag to the main application. So when I save the changes, you can see I'm going to have some width and padding to this application. Now you can see everything is completely ready, but now I want to filter this data whenever I click on these buttons. Right now, if I click on this button in the console, I'm going to get the current button as a response. You can see. Now what I want to get the previous 7 days leader using this button. So to get that, we have to back to the board.js. So let me close the profile.js and the database.js. Inside this board, right here, I'm going to create a new function here. Just down this component. Here I'm going to create a new function with the name between. And then I'm going to specify here two parameters, data and between. And then I'm going to pass here curly braces. Inside this data, I'm going to pass this array of object. And inside this between, I'm going to pass this button data ID. So for example, if I click on this 7 days button, inside this between, I'm going to pass 7. Inside this between function, I'm going to first filter the data by the date and then sort that data with ascending order. So to do that, I'm going to say here constant today. Let me first get the current date. So to get the current date, we need to add here constant today with date object. So this will just return the current date. And then I'm going to say here constant previous is equal to new date object and then pass the today here. To get the previous date, let me first initialize it with the current date. And just after that, I'm going to say here previous dot set date previous dot get date minus between. So for example, inside this between right here, I have 7. Inside this previous, I'm going to set the previous date. Now what I want to get the previous 7 days data. So for example, the date of today is 10. I'm going to minus 7 from it. Then this is going to return 3. So let's suppose if it is 10 Feb, then I'm going to minus 7 from it. Then this is going to return 3 Feb as a response. So inside this previous, I'm going to store the previous 7th day. Just sort that. Once we have the previous day, I'm going to filter that data. So let me first add here let filter is equal to data.filter. Filter is a JavaScript method, allows us to filter the data. So I'm going to add here filter. I'm going to call here var parameter. Inside this val, I'm going to have my objects. So I'm going to say here let user date is equal to new date, and inside this I'm going to say val.dt. So inside this I'm going to call this property value. So inside this user date, I'm going to have the database user date. So once I get the user date, I'm going to return a filter data. So I'm going to say here return previous if it is less than or equal to user date, and today if the today is greater than or equal to the user date. Then I'm going to return that. Then I'm going to return that object. So this is going to filter that data. So let me show you the result first. So I'm going to say here console.log filter, copy this between. Here I'm going to say between something like this. And to this between, let me first specify this data leaderboard. Let me save the changes and reload the browser. Oops, I think I misspelled something. Yeah, right here, I just added the parenthesis to this data object. I used to do this type of mistake. So now you can see inside this console, I'm going to get only one object. Now this is because in the previous 7 days, I have only one leader. Now this statement is going to return previous 6 days data. What I want to get the previous 7 days data. To get that, we need to add 1 inside this 7. So instead of this 7, this hard-coded value, I'm going to call here between this parameter in the parentheses, something like this, and add here plus 1. So when I pass here 7 to this between, something like this, I'm going to have here 8 at this position, and then I'm going to get the previous 7 days data. So when I save the changes, you can see I'm going to have the result something like this. So now once I filter this data with the date, let me just sort this data with ascending order. So let me get rid of this console.log, and here I'm going to add a comment and say sort with ascending order. So I'm going to say here return filter. I'm going to get this filter data first, and then I'm going to call here method sort. And with this method, I'm going to get two parameters, a and b, the first value and the second value. And then I'm going to call here a callback function, something like this. Here I'm going to say if a dot score, if it is equal to b dot score, then I'm going to return b dot score minus a dot score. So if two elements have the same number, then the one who has larger number gets win. Now just out of that, I'm going to just say here else return, else I'm going to return b dot score minus a dot score. That's it. Let me save the changes, reload the browser, and now get rid of this between right from here and pass that inside this profile property, something like this. Let me save this. You can see in the previous 7 days I have only one leader. What I want when I click on the 7 days, I want the previous 7 days leader. When I click on the 30 days, I want the previous 30 days leader. And when I click on this all times, I want to get all the data and get the all time leader. So to get that, as you know, we have here a handler function. Instead of console.log, I'm going to update the value of this parameter with the use state react hook. So I'm going to add here at the top, I'm going to add constant. In the array, I'm going to say period, and then I'm going to say set period is equal to use state and pass here 0, the default value. Make sure you import this before using it. I already have this, so I'm going to say here use state, and instead of this console.log, I'm going to say set period e.target.dataset.id. So this is going to return this data ID and specify that to this variable. And I'm going to get rid of this 7 right from here and pass period variable, this state variable, something like this. Let me save this. And now when I click on the 7 days, oops, I think I misspelled something. Yeah, right here it's data set, not date set. Let me save this, reload the browser, and now when I click on the 7 days, you can see I'm going to get the previous 7 days data. When I click on this 30 days, I'm going to get the previous 30 days data. And then when I click on all time, I'm not going to get anything here. This is because I did not have anything for all time data. So let me just set that. So to set all time data, here inside this filter, I'm going to simply say if between is equal to 0, then return the val variable, and then I'm going to sort that data. Now you can see I'm going to have the result what I want. Now when I click on the 7 days, I'm going to get the 7 days data. When I click on the 30 days, I'm going to get the 30 days data. And when I click on all time, I'm going to get all the data of the user. So now as you can see, we successfully created a beautiful leaderboard section for the website. Leaderboard section for the website. If you find anything useful, make sure to press the like button, share this video with your friends, subscribe for more latest videos. That is all for now. I will see you in the next one.